All right, welcome class to section 3 of chapter 19. This is the Wilson War and Peace section, and it's basically about the end of World War I and the impact that America had on it. So the question you have to answer is, how did America impact the First World War and the peace that came afterwards? So this is an image of the Hall of Versailles. So it's the Hall of Mirrors in right outside of Paris, and these are the victorious Allied powers. In the middle, this is American President Woodrow Wilson. So on this trip, he's the first American president to ever travel abroad during his term of office in particular. So this is a really big deal that he is sitting there in France at the victory celebration for World War I. Next to him is the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Lloyd George, and trailing behind him are the Prime Ministers of Italy, who betrayed the Central Powers in 1914, as well as France, and that is George Clemenceau Latigues. So this is a big celebration. You can see, you've got the different flags, the different countries that are victorious in World War I. And everyone's literally rose petals are being thrown in front of Woodrow Wilson's feet because he's seen to be so instrumental to peace. So part of the focus question is, how did the U.S. entry into World War I impact the war? So the short answer is the seas were largely under Allied control by the end of 1917 after the U.S. gets involved in the war. So what impact does the U.S. make on World War I? Well, it impacts naval theaters by putting them into Allied control. So the U.S. enters the war and the Allies basically get control over the oceans. This is because the U.S. and the United Kingdom start to move their ships in what are called convoys, which is one of your vocab words. And that's basically you surround ships like the Lusitania, full of weapons, ammunition, things like that, with naval vessels with guns that are basically able to protect them. This chart over here shows you these are months of the year. So when the U.S. enters the war, the red and the black and the blue all together represent how many tons of boat were sunk. As the U.S. sends more and more ships, the number goes down till there's virtually no Allied shipping that submarines are able to sink. So again, just to repeat, the U.S. helps the Allies take control of the ocean. That should be part of your focus question. These are pictures of submarines. If you've wondered how a submarine works, how do they not run out of air underwater? And if you've ever heard the word snorkel, the original snorkel is this device right here. It's a long tube that you suck air into the submarine from. And when the submarine is under the water, it's flat against the deck. When it raises the surface, up it goes. So this little bobber right here is effectively like a straw. And so the engine of the submarine sucks air in from the outside world and into the submarine so people there don't asphyxiate. My grandfather actually served on a submarine in World War II. And up until after the Second World War, it was really common for sailors to just smoke cigarettes inside the submarine. So when they would surface, the snorkel would go up and a bunch of smoke would billow out. So when they were trying to be sneaky, they would tell all the sailors, hey, no smoking for a couple days so we don't reveal our position when we get to the surface. So again, a snorkel originally comes from this thing right here on the submarine. So after the U.S. gets involved in the war, the Russians get out of it. So this is unrelated to the focus question, but super, super important to world history. So if you've ever heard of the Soviet Union, this is the beginning of the Soviet Union becoming a country. So the Russian Revolution begins in March 1917, and they basically what's called a provisional government is created of soldiers and Soviets. So the word Soviet and Soviet Union means council. And this is the council of rebelling sailors who are so sick of the war effort that they make a pirate flag and try to overthrow the Russian government. And then they succeed. So rebelling sailors, angry at Russia losing the war, rebel in Kronstadt, St. Petersburg, and basically take over the Russian government. But wait, there's more. So you've got this gentleman right here named Vladimir Lenin. He is the leader of the Russian Revolution, another vocab word. Again, not part of the focus question, but super important to world history. Lenin is a communist. If you've heard the word communist before, you probably have some ideas about what it means. We're going to talk about it more later. So Lenin's in exile in Switzerland because he is a revolutionary communist who's trying to overthrow the Russian government. The Germans, you guys know how viruses work, right? They put him into what's called a SEAL train. So this Russian communist, they sent him to Russia via neutral Sweden in the middle of World War I, all the way through Finland to the capital of Russia, St. Petersburg. And they basically use him as what they consider to be an infection of communism. So if Lenin shows up, and just like a virus, in our world right now, you find Lenin is able to convince and bring together other communists and spread his ideology until the Soviets get dominated by communists. So there's a Russian revolution. The military overthrows the Tsar. The Germans send the leader of the Communist Party back into Russia, and he's able to infect effectively the Russian population with communism and change the tone of that revolution. So this is still the same question. This is kind of what I just talked about. In November, and Russia has this old calendar, it's called the October Revolution. There's a Bolshevik coup that ends up with this giant civil war in Russia. So again, here's the guy, Vladimir Lenin, leader of the Russian Communist Party. And this is some stuff this is basically, his party was only about a quarter of the support in the Russian parliament at the time, but nonetheless, they have what's called a coup. And you may remember the attempted coup that happened 2 weeks ago, where there was folks trying to overturn the results of an election. In Russia, it succeeded, and the communists took over. So that's what happens in Russia. This is another one of the Soviets. Sweet Russian poster about this Russian Civil War. If you take world history, we'll talk more about it. Red Army, White Army, again, Russian Civil War. These are the communists over here with the red flags. The people trying to destroy communism saw it as a dragon destroying Russian civilization. This side loses, this side wins. Another really interesting map. There's a lot of stories here that I would tell you that would take longer if I wasn't recording this. There is one, if any of you are of Czech ancestry, there's an army of 20,000 Czechs who are kidnapped by the Russians, forced into the Russian military, rebel against the Tsar's government with the sailors, travel all the way across Russia on the Trans-Siberian Railway to right outside of China, take a boat around the world and get to Czechoslovakia, and help form this brand new nation in 1919 because they basically fought their way across the planet. The Russian Revolution is crazy. So there's that. And at the same time, so the Russian Revolution happens. The Germans are occupying territory of Russia all the way up to the borders of modern Ukraine. The Soviet Union, once this Russian Revolution succeeds, needs to buy some time, and they give Germany all the territory in the red. So I just want to repeat that. Germany won World War I against the Russians. And that's because the Soviet Union got knocked out of the war and gave up Ukraine, modern-day Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, all of those nations that you did on that map at the beginning of the unit. All of those were given to the Germans in a peace treaty by the Soviet Union. So, American troops, we've talked about the American naval impact. That was part of the focus question. Here's another thing that's going to be part of the focus question as well. This is an image of American American soldiers basically lining up and getting ready to go fight at the front. The Americans basically are mostly about the biggest impact they have is mostly making the Germans aware of how many more reinforcements that the Allied troops have. So hundreds of thousands of troops are shifted west from Russia, where the Germans have won, to the trenches, the Western Front, but it's too late. There are too many Americans, the Allies have too many troops, and the Germans lose World War I with the American arrival in Belgium and France. Yep. So this continues that same question. Hundreds of small skirmishes, dozens of battles. Wilson is a racist, and he racially segregates the military. So African Americans end up serving under French command in combat troops because Wilson prevented them from doing so under the American flag and earned the highest honor in France. So this entire battalion of African American soldiers from the United States fights for France, gets the equivalent of the Medal of Honor, and the U.S. won't even give any African American troops medals because Woodrow Wilson has segregated the military. 1.3 serve and about 300,000 become casualties, which means they got shot. A casualty is not necessarily somebody who dies or hurt. And again, 50,000 fatally. And so here's an image of that French battalion of African American soldiers going across the Second Battle of the Marne and the Allied victory there. So World War I ends basically because the Central Powers collapse into revolution. You've got, again, the Russian Revolution, there goes Russia. The Austro-Hungarian Empire collapses into the different nationalities within it. So those Bosnian Serbs, they rise up. Croatians, Czechs, everybody. And then in Germany, socialists overthrow the Kaiser in a similar revolution to what happened in Russia and basically take over the German Republic or make it into a German Republic. So the Kaiser is gone, Austro-Hungary is disintegrated, the Russian Empire is gone, and this happens on the 11th hour of the 11th month of 1918. So that is November 11th, 1918. What that is what we call now Veterans Day. So if you think about it, that's Veterans Day is a memorial to basically the end of World War I, which was considered at the time to be the war that will end all wars because it was such an atrocity. 6.5 million civilians, 13 million soldiers, and basically human history before this is gone. World War I is the pivot point to the modern world in which you live in which war is seen as terrifying. You know it's going to be deadly. The consequences, people don't go off talking about the glory of war in the same way they used to, with some exceptions. And it's really, again, it's one of the biggest pivot points that you have seen as far as your study of history is concerned so far. This is in Germany. Unfortunately, there are some harbingers of future failures about keeping the peace. This guy may or may not look to you like the profile of a Nazi soldier, but that is kind of what he is. The German government, that socialist government, uses disbanded army units to crush a communist rebellion in Germany. And so when the German government crushes the communist rebellion, you get a split between the socialists and the communists that allows fascism to take root, just as a really exciting harbinger of the future. So this gets back to the focus question. So the question, again, was, how did America impact the war and the peace that came after? So Wilson has 14 points that he thinks the new peace treaty should try to match up to. So the goal is peace without victory. The communists in Russia, as they withdraw from the war, they say this is all about imperialism and countries just trying to take advantage of each other. Wilson says, no, we're trying to make the world safe for democracy. And to his credit, he really means it. So he releases his 14 points. There's a whole bunch of them. You have to look at them as that assignment that I think was due yesterday. Yeah, and your assignment is due yesterday. The long story short, it's about self-determination, democracy for individual nations, and about not having revenge on different countries involved in the war. And so it's the only way out, Wilhelm, 14 points of peace. Here's a summary of the 14 points. The most important is the League of Nations. And so what the League of Nations is a place where countries can go to solve disputes without fighting a war. That's the goal. His ideas are really popular, except he didn't realize that he never asked the American people if they wanted to do it or not. So there's this gentleman named Henry Cabot Lodge from, believe it or not, Massachusetts. He's a Republican, and Wilson's a Democrat. Lodge wants to be part of the peace treaty. Wilson doesn't let him do it. And Lodge torpedoes the League of Nations in the U.S. and the Versailles Treaty because he's mad at Wilson for not being nice enough to him. So the U.S. does not join the League of Nations. These are the big three. This is Lloyd George, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. This is Clemenceau, the Prime Minister of France. This is Woodrow Wilson, the American president. This guy wants revenge on Germany. Wilson wants democracy, peace without victory. And Lloyd George is kind of in the middle, promised the British people that he was going to get revenge on Germany, but really wants what Wilson wants. So basically, the Treaty of Versailles ends up the way it does because France gets its way. They want reparation payments from Germany in revenge for the war. Anything else is basically considered to be a surrender to Germany, and they kind of keep the old way of thinking. The other problem is Wilson has a stroke in the middle of negotiations. So he is unable to articulate the position of the U.S., and when he gets back home, he has a second stroke and is bedridden for months. And so when the Senate is debating the League of Nations, Wilson has nothing to say because he can't speak. So they got a vengeful peace basically because of the failure of Wilson to convince these guys to go a different route. Here are the changes of the borders. You've seen this already in that first activity you did in this unit. But again, long story short, you've got new nations in Europe. Poland comes out of three empires: Austria, Germany, and Russia. It's kind of a miracle Poland exists at all after World War I. You get a Hispanic Romania. You get a Yugoslavia, that's Serbia, getting everything it wanted before World War I. Czechoslovakia, brand new nation. Austria, Hungary. At the end of World War I, France allies with all of these new nations. Same idea, just the changes in the map of Europe. And so again, why does America reject the League of Nations? Long story short, Wilson fails to convince this guy, Henry Cabot Lodge, that it's a good idea. Him and his mustache, his feelings are hurt, so they take their ball and they go home. Here's some art at the end of World War I. This is German. So this is a discipline called surrealism. And so you may or may not be able to tell that World War I was a bit of a collective trauma for the people involved in it based on this image. If you pay attention, you can see like this guy's got a piece of the chair as his leg. He's using his foot, his brain's all, it's horrifying war injuries, things like that. So people see the real face of war is, again, 1.5 million people become casualties as a result of it. Another terrifying skull. So this is your Hitler. This is a fake image. So there's lots and lots of misinformation that comes out of the end of World War I. This is an image of Hitler supposedly finding out that Germany had lost World War I, and he's really upset, and this is why he becomes a fascist later on. In reality, he wasn't there. He was a soldier. He was in the hospital having been gassed, and so there was no way he could be in this crowd in Munich to hear about the end of the Versailles Treaty. So at the end of World War I, you start to get the beginning of a false history of the conflict, beginning with images, including images like this, which are made after World War II to try to justify why history went the way it did. So we're going to talk more about propaganda. Remember that ethos, logos, and pathos activity we did in the Second World War with the propaganda ministries of the Nazi Empire. In reality, this guy's Hitler. Doesn't look at all like the Hitler that you recognize. He had a mustache and all that. He was just a Austrian who joins the German military, gets gassed, and gets into some trouble in the 1920s in Vienna. And that's that. I may pause them.